June 25th, 2009, a morning that began with a deceptive tranquility in the hills of Holmby Hills, California. Yet within the walls of 100 North Carrollwood Drive, the air was thick with a tragedy that the world was not yet ready to face, as the man who had redefined the very limits of human creativity, Michael Joseph Jackson, prepared to take his final silent bow from a stage that had become his sanctuary and his prison. To truly grasp the weight of his final 3 minutes, we must peel back the layers of the king of pop persona. We must look past the 750 million records sold, the 13 Grammy Awards, and the moonwalk that made gravity look like a suggestion. And we must find the fragile, heartbroken boy from Gary, Indiana, who spent 50 years trying to buy back the childhood that was stolen from him by the harsh glare of the spotlight and the heavy hand of a father who didn't know how to love without a belt. Michael didn't just sing for us, he bled for us, pouring every ounce of his soul into melodies that became the soundtrack of our lives. Yet as he lay there in those final moments, the applause of billions was replaced by the cold, clinical beep of a heart monitor and the desperate, hurried whispers of a doctor who couldn't fix what was truly broken. We saw the superstar who could halt the world with a snap of his fingers, but we rarely saw the man who sat in the dark, crying because he was the most famous person on the planet, yet didn't have a single friend to call his own. A man who built a kingdom called Neverland just to hide from a world that was too loud, too cruel, and too quick to judge a heart it never bothered to understand. As those final 3 minutes began to stretch into eternity, Michael wasn't thinking about the This Is It tour or the millions of dollars he owed. His mind was drifting back to the simple dreams he had as a child, to the magic of a world where children didn't have to suffer and where love was the only currency that mattered. There is a haunting beauty in the realization that even as he was being crushed under the weight of insomnia and anxiety, his final recordings were not about his own pain, but about healing the earth, about building hospitals for children, and about a legacy of mercy that would outlive the scandals in the headlines. Imagine him lying there, his eyes drifting toward the photographs of Prince, Paris, and Blanket, realizing that his greatest masterpiece wasn't Thriller or Bad, but the 3 lives he had created who loved him not for his fame, but for the way he tucked them into bed at night. The world saw a spectacle, but in those final moments, Michael saw the truth, that fame is a shadow that vanishes when the sun goes down, and that the only thing that remains is the love you gave away for free. He was a man who lived 1,000 lives in 50 years, a man who felt the pain of the entire world and tried to cure it with a song. And as his breath grew shorter, he wasn't afraid of the dark, because he had spent his whole life trying to be the light for everyone else. His last plea for milk was a tragic cry for the only rest his overactive mind could find, but his true final message to us was a roar of compassion, a plea for us to look at the man in the mirror and finally make that change, to stop tearing each other down and to start healing the world before it's too late. He was the greatest performer the world has ever seen, but his most powerful act was his vulnerability, the way he let us see his wounds so that we might feel less alone in ours. As the heartbeat that had pulsed for every nation on earth began to falter, I believe Michael finally felt the peace he had been chasing since the Jackson 5, a peace that didn't require a costume or a stage, a peace that was simply about being home. He gave us his bones, his blood, and his very essence until he was a ghost of himself, a Peter Pan who had finally grown too tired to fly. And as the curtain fell on his life at 2:26 p.m., the planet felt a sudden chill, a collective realization that the king was gone, and with him, a piece of our own innocence had vanished forever. But death cannot silence a voice that was built on the vibrations of the soul, and as we listen to his music today, we aren't just hearing a pop star, we are hearing the final wisdom of a man who knew that in the end,
Love is the only thing that is real. Goodbye, Michael. The world never knew how to hold a miracle like you, but we will spend the rest of our days trying to dance to the rhythm you left behind in the stars.
To understand the silence of those final 3 minutes, we have to travel back across the bridge of time, away from the glitz of Los Angeles, back to the soot-stained streets of Gary, Indiana, where a little boy with eyes too big for his face was already carrying the weight of a dynasty on his tiny shoulders. Before he was the king of pop, he was a child who wasn't allowed to be a child. A boy who watched other children play through the windows of a recording studio while he was forced to sing about love and heartbreak, emotions he was far too young to feel, but was commanded to perform with the precision of a machine. His father, Joseph, was a man of steel and belts, a man who saw talent as a ticket out of poverty, but forgot that a soul needs more than discipline to survive. He taught Michael how to hit every note, but he never taught him how to feel safe in his own skin. Imagine a 5-year-old boy standing on a stage, the heat of the spotlight searing into his skin, knowing that if he missed a step or slipped on a lyric, the punishment waiting for him backstage would be swifter than any applause. This was the foundation of the man we saw, a foundation built on a desperate, agonizing need for approval, a hunger for a love that wasn't conditional on his performance, a hunger that he would chase into the deepest, darkest corners of his adult life. As Michael grew, the world grew with him, but while we were falling in love with his genius, he was falling further away from himself, becoming a man who could command an army of fans, but couldn't look in a mirror without seeing the scars of a boy who was told he wasn't good enough. Neverland was not just a ranch, it was a 500-acre cry for help, a frantic attempt to reconstruct a childhood that had been stolen by the Motown cameras and the Jackson 5 tours. He built a world of carousels, candy shops, and steam trains because he was trying to hide from the reality of a world that only wanted to consume him, a world that treated him like a specimen in a jar rather than a human being with a pulse. He spent millions of dollars on toys and animals because they were the only things that didn't judge him, the only things that didn't have an ulterior motive, the only things that whispered, "I love you," without asking for a signature or a check. But even in the sanctuary of Neverland, the whispers of the world found him. The tabloids began to sharpen their knives, turning his innocence into a spectacle, his kindness into a crime, and his loneliness into a joke. Imagine the sheer suffocating isolation of being the most recognizable face on earth, yet having to wear masks and disguises just to walk through a park. To be a man who lived behind high walls and iron gates, yet felt like he was standing naked in the middle of a crowded stadium every single day. He gave us Man in the Mirror because he was desperately trying to fix the reflection he saw, a reflection that the world kept shattering with every headline and every lawsuit. By the time he reached those final years, the music hadn't stopped, but the joy had. The dance had become a duty, a way to pay off the debts of a life that had become too expensive to maintain, and a way to prove to his children that their father was still the superhero the world once worshipped. In his private moments, away from the cameras, he was a man who sat in a room filled with mannequins just so he wouldn't feel so alone, a man who would talk for hours to strangers on the phone just to hear a voice that didn't want anything from him. He was a king without a kingdom, a performer who had forgotten how to live when the music wasn't playing. Those final 3 minutes in that bedroom were just the final notes of a song that had been playing for 50 years, a song of incredible beauty, but one that was written in a key of profound, untouchable sadness. He was the greatest entertainer to ever live, but he died a pauper of the spirit, a man who gave so much light to the world that he left himself in total darkness. As we look at his legacy, we have to ask ourselves, did we love him, or did we just love what he did for us? Because Michael Jackson gave us his life, literally and figuratively,
and in the end, the world he tried so hard to heal was the same world that broke him beyond repair. He was the boy who wouldn't grow up, not because he was immature, but because he was never given the chance to grow up in peace. And as he lay there, feeling the last bit of energy leave his tired frame, I believe he finally forgave the little boy from Gary. He finally told him that the performance was over, and that it was okay to finally close his eyes and dream of a place where there were no cameras, no lawyers, and no pain. He was our king, but he was his own victim, a man who danced on the stars but could never quite find his footing on the earth.
As the decade of the 80s roared into existence, the world witnessed a transformation that defied the laws of nature as Michael Jackson transitioned from a star into a supernova, releasing Thriller and becoming a global phenomenon that transcended race, language, and borders. Yet, as the red leather jacket became a uniform for a generation and the moonwalk became a dance for the ages, the man behind the magic was beginning to disintegrate under the sheer velocity of his own success. Imagine the internal dissonance of being the most beautiful man in the world to millions while feeling like a monster in your own skin, a man who battled vitiligo and the physical remnants of a fire that scorched his scalp, leading him down a rabbit hole of surgeries and alterations, not because of vanity, but because he was desperately trying to erase the face of the father who had haunted his dreams, trying to find a version of himself that didn't hurt to look at in the mirror. We mocked him for his masks, we ridiculed him for his changes, but we never asked why a man who had everything felt the need to hide everything. We saw the king, but we ignored the man in the mirror who was screaming for someone to just hold his hand without a camera flash exploding in his face. By the time the This Is It tour was announced, Michael was a ghost of the performer he once was, a 50-year-old soul whose bones were weary from decades of gravity-defying stunts, yet he agreed to 50 shows in London, not for the ego, but for the legacy, for the chance to show his children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, that their father was the superhero the world remembered, and to finally secure a future where they wouldn't have to live in the shadows of his debts. Those final rehearsals were a testament to his sheer will, a man who could barely eat yet could still command a stage with a flicker of his wrist. But as the night of June 25th approached, the pressure became a suffocating blanket, and the only way he could find the silence he needed to survive was through the very milk that would eventually usher him into the eternal dark. Now I want you to step into that room for those final 2 minutes, away from the headlines and the scandals, and hear the voice of a man who is no longer a king, but a traveler preparing for a long journey home. In those last moments, as the heart that had beaten for every person on this planet began to lose its rhythm, Michael didn't speak of his records or his riches. His final message, whispered into the vast, cold silence of that bedroom, was a plea for humanity that should break every heart that has ever felt alone. He spoke of the children, always the children, the innocent souls he believed were the only hope for a world that had forgotten how to be kind. And he whispered about a love that was so pure it didn't require an audience. He said that we must heal the world, not with politics or power, but with the simple, radical act of seeing one another, of recognizing the pain in a stranger's eyes and choosing to be the light instead of the shadow. His final wisdom was a roar against the darkness of judgment. He begged us to stop tearing each other down over things that don't matter, to stop being so quick to condemn and so slow to forgive, because in the end, when you are standing where he was, the only thing that remains is the love you sowed in the hearts of others. He knew he was leaving. He felt the pull of a neverland that was finally real, a place where he could run through the grass without being chased, where he could sing without being judged, and where he could finally be the little boy he was never allowed to be. His final 3 minutes were not a tragedy of medicine, but a tragedy of the human heart, a heart that gave so much light to the world that it eventually burned itself out.
As the screen of his life faded to a soft golden white, Michael Jackson didn't leave us with a song. He left us with a challenge to look at the man in our own mirrors and finally make that change, to be the mercy that someone is praying for tonight, and to never, ever let the music of our souls be silenced by the noise of a cynical world. The king of pop is gone, the stage is empty, and the final curtain has fallen, but his message is vibrating in the very air we breathe. Love is the answer, love is the way, and love is the only thing that lives forever. Goodbye, Michael. You gave us the moon, you gave us the stars, and you gave us your very soul. The world is a little darker without your light, but we will keep dancing in the shadows until we find our way back to the magic you left behind. The court of life is adjourned, the verdict is in, and the only word that remains is love. Always love.